Hey everyone, I'm back again with another video, and today I'm going to talk about a deck that is very influential to me, and it's very near and dear to my heart. So I'm specifically going to be talking about the notorious Exodia OTK deck that everyone loves to hate except for me. And I'm going to talk about the idea behind this deck, along with the most notable iterations of the deck. And I'm going to talk about my personal experience with this particular build. But before I start, feel free to like, comment, and share this video, and feel free to do the same for my other videos. And feel free to subscribe if you really like my content. But without any further ado, let's get into it. So, if you don't know what Exodia OTK is, OTK stands for a one-turn kill or one-turn knockout. And Exodia OTK refers to the deck that's meant to pull off the Exodia win condition in one turn, and typically on the first turn. And you may be wondering how it's even possible to do this, since Exodia decks typically are slow, but the way you do this is by drawing until you get Exodia in the one turn, and sometimes you wind up drawing the entire deck depending on the shuffle. Which sounds absolutely insane, but you typically carried out this strategy by using Royal Magical Library to draw cards until you got Exodia. This meant you had to activate tons of spell cards to give Royal Magical Library 3 spell counters, so that you could draw one card by removing 3 spell counters from it. Many people tried to flesh out the original Exodia OTK strategy just by using Royal Magical Library, which was difficult but not impossible. But the Exodia OTK really had an awakening of sorts when Spellcaster's Command Structure deck released in 2009, where an earth-shattering card known as Magical Citadel of Endymion debuted and changed the Exodia OTK strategy forever. Royal Magical Library is the heart and soul of the strategy, but it had an issue of not being able to hold more than 3 counters on the card. This made you think more about when you specifically needed to activate spell cards, so that you didn't accidentally waste an activation by accidentally activating a spell card when you already have 3 spell counters on Royal Magical Library. Magical Citadel of Endymion removed this barrier by allowing you to keep as many spell counters as you wanted on Magical Citadel, and this was revolutionary. This was so revolutionary primarily because Citadel also gained spell counters anytime a spell card was activated, which basically doubled your spell counter number if you also had Royal Magical Library on the field. But the kicker is that you could also use the counters on Citadel to activate the effects of any other card that uses spell counters. This includes Royal Magical Library. And this was huge since you definitely relied on having Royal Magical Library in your opening hand in order to rack up spell counters. But now you could store spell counters on Citadel in case you didn't get Royal Magical Library in your opening turn. This means that it's easier to pull off the OTK when you eventually fish out Royal Magical Library. It also has a protection effect, and you could transfer any spell counters from Magical Library to Citadel if it was ever destroyed. And this is the main core of the Exodia OTK strategy. But how on earth do you get enough spell counters to draw out the whole deck? You mainly did this with cards like using 3 copies of Toon Table of Contents, so that you could search out Toon World, which meant that you had to activate and you resolved 4 spell cards, which meant that you would gain 4 spell counters with Royal Magical Library, or 8 total spell counters if you had Citadel on board too. This meant that you could draw 2 cards, which is a staple strategy in this particular OTK. Other staple cards were things such as Golden Bamboo Sword and Broken Bamboo Sword. It involved you equipping Broken Bamboo Sword to Royal Magical Library, so that you could then activate Golden Bamboo Sword, which then allowed you to draw 2 cards. And this was your supplementary draw engine for the deck. But these spells further granted activations which you could then use for more spell counters, so that you could then use on Royal Magical Library. Other draw engines that were conventionally used in the deck were engines such as the Blue Eyes White Dragon and Trade-In combo, where you discarded Blue Eyes White Dragon to the grave so that you could draw 2 cards. Some players used other cards such as Summoner's Art to search out the Blue Eyes White Dragon in your deck, which provided more counters and it allowed you to more easily use Trade-In. And I found this particular engine to be particularly interesting because I personally experimented with it when I was initially building the deck. And I personally used 3 copies of Blue Eyes White Dragon, but I later changed it to 3 copies of Malefic Stardust Dragon, since you could special summon out Malefic Stardust Dragon just in case you needed to. Unfortunately, the regular Blue Eyes engine just bricked way too much. Thankfully, cards like Magical Stone Excavation allowed you to exchange these bricks for a spell card in your graveyard. However, later on, this strategy changed up when spellbooks were introduced into Yu-Gi-Oh! This enabled a more cohesive Exodia OTK strategy, since spellbooks were like any other archetype which had a fairly solid search strategy. And as the name suggests, spellbooks had an abundance of spell cards which were prime for generating spell counters. If you add cards like Spellbook of Knowledge, this creates more draw power in the strategy in general. And if you further use something like Spellbook of the Master, you can double up on draw effects like Spellbook of Knowledge, which allowed you to rack up spell counters. Furthermore, strong staple 1-ofs like One Day of Peace and Upstart Goblin further placed pure draw power at your disposal. And modern day draw cards like Pot of Prosperity gave you immense draw power to further perpetuate your strategy. If you take all of these strategies into consideration, you have an extremely draw intensive deck that can drive your opponent insane. And that's kind of the fun of this deck, especially if you use it against someone who's unaware of the Exodia OTK strategy. And it's always hilarious to see the confused face on your opponent's face when you're going through the strategy. And I have some personal experience with this since a friend of mine introduced me to the Exodia OTK deck, and I liked it so much that I decided to try it on another friend of mine. So that's what I did. I tried it on one of my other friends, and I'll never forget the look of disbelief on his face. But the favorite thing about this strategy is probably the challenge involved in knowing when to play and when to hold certain cards. And it's almost like an intricate puzzle that you have to work through. And there's always a rush to try to see if you can complete and navigate through the combo and finally enjoy the feeling of winning in an unconventional way. And that's what I enjoy most about this deck in general. But that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on Exodia OTK. And like I said, this deck is widely hated, but I thought I'd offer the reasons why I personally enjoy the deck. And while I can't refute that the deck has no interaction, it is hilarious to see people's reactions to the strategy. And it's kind of a running joke that Exodia decks kind of ruin friendships, primarily because of the annoying strategy. But with that pretty much wraps it up for this video. If you would like to support more content like this in the future, you can do so at my Necromancer 1040 Patreon link down below. I normally post it in the description, and you can check it there along with the other cool things I normally post down below. And with that, thank you so much for watching, thank you so much for your support, and I'll catch you in the next one. Alright, take care.